people that produce it have a vested interest in making people think that it'll make life more convenient and better. But I think ultimately it's about control, being able to micromanage people's lives and how they go about their daily business in a way that doesn't necessarily involve that many people. They can have algorithms managing and watching a lot of this stuff, and are able to control the masses to a much more intense degree with fewer people. And that makes sense, as we're seeing, because of the pandemic.
Listen to what she said. Control, not convenience. Whitney just gave you the entire AI debate in one word. The billionaires don't want AI to make our lives easier. They want to manage billions with fewer and fewer humans. Algorithms replacing cops. Algorithms replacing judges. Algorithms replacing HR. That's their vision. And the timing isn't coincidence. Biggest wealth transfer in modern history happened during COVID. BlackRock buying neighborhoods. Companies consolidating. Pandemic was the cover. After 2008, we had Occupy Wall Street. This time, no protests. Cover worked perfectly. Let's keep going.
Right. Well, UBI is a separate thing, right? And Andrew Yang, for progressives that are really into UBI, it's worth pointing out that Andrew Yang himself has admitted this goes back to an idea from Milton Friedman. And the idea of UBI is that you have UBI, but all existing social services and that social safety net are gutted and replaced by the UBI. So it's not exactly even as Andrew Yang attempted to pitch it to Democrat voters in the last election cycle, it's not exactly as progressive as maybe you've been led to believe. But in terms of AI, obviously they have the people that produce it have a vested interest in making people think that it'll make life more convenient and better. But I think ultimately it's about control, being able to micromanage people's lives and how they go about their daily business in a way that doesn't necessarily involve that many people. They can have algorithms managing and watching a lot of this stuff, and are able to control the masses to a much more intense degree with fewer people. And that makes sense, as we're seeing, because of the pandemic. Wealth concentrate in much fewer hands than ever before. A massive wealth transfer has undeniably taken place while this has gone on. So it would make sense for them to want to be able to maintain the new status quo, not unlike after 2008. You saw a lot of protests, of course, Occupy Wall Street and what have you after that wealth transfer. But this time, under the guise of the pandemic, another massive wealth transfer on that scale, that same scale, has taken place, if not bigger. But not a lot of protests because they've been able to do it under the guise of pandemic relief, which of course was managed by BlackRock, one of the world's biggest asset managers, that now is buying up real estate across the U.S. And just being predatory like they've always been. They're a big partner of the World Economic Forum, by the way. But in terms of artificial intelligence itself, they like to say that it's highly accurate and can do all this stuff. But a lot of that, those statistics rely on what the companies that produce the algorithms themselves say in terms of accuracy, and they haven't really been scrutinized by independent experts or independent groups of really any sort. So it's really just one of those things of take the company's word for it. And in the case of, for example, facial recognition AI, we know that they have a huge racial bias. And that there's been, efforts to sort of fix that, and it hasn't gone away. There was a really prominent female programmer at Google who I think was head of their ethics in AI thing. I forget her name, sorry. But towards the end of last year, she was forced out of Google for saying that these racial biases in AI are never going to be eradicated, essentially. And it does kind of make sense when you think of it, what I mentioned earlier, sort of this race by these Silicon Valley companies to just dump as much data into these to train these algorithms as possible without really caring that much about the quality of the data that's put in. Because when that happens, if you think about all the data that's around the internet, a lot of the stuff on the internet is crazy. There's a lot of stuff on there that not everyone consumes, that's considered fringe or whatever, inappropriate for a lot of audiences. And so if you're dumping all of that into these algorithms, obviously you're going to get some odd results, perhaps, because it's not exactly a reflection of what everyone thinks or exactly how the real world works, what's on the internet necessarily. If you take it in terms of the amount of content that's on the internet, for as an example, what if you have a person who's quote unquote normal who only posts a small amount of things, but then you have a person who's totally nuts who has like 6 web pages and posts all over the place constantly. Obviously their content's going to be overrepresented, right? We've seen this before too with Microsoft, for example, attempting to introduce an AI chatbot online, and within 24 hours it was spouting like Nazi slogans and saying all this really inappropriate stuff. It doesn't really take long for AI to be derailed and in that sense. So I mean, I think they're really overselling its effectiveness to a significant degree, and it definitely does have a lot of issues when it comes to bias and all of this stuff. And what's really concerning is that we see the push for smart cities going on, and facial recognition is a huge part of that. So the fact that these biases are there and people have in these companies themselves have raised the alarm that that isn't going to go away, and they're actually forced out of those companies for saying so, I think is really alarming, that given that we're seeing
Microsoft chatbot turned Nazi in 24 hours, not a month. 24 hours. Garbage in equals garbage out. And the Google ethics person, her crime was saying racial bias in AI can never be fully fixed. She wasn't fired because she was wrong. She was fired because her bosses don't want that message in the conversation. Because they're still pushing facial recognition for smart cities. Still pushing AI for law enforcement. Still pushing it everywhere. Speak up, and you're pushed out. The biases aren't being fixed. They're being shipped.
This push to make law enforcement in the military also very focused on in the coming years on virtual reality, on AI stuff, on facial recognition, and all of these big tech emerging technologies that have AI at their root definitely is cause for concern. But it goes beyond that. Also in the sense of AI, obviously a lot of people know that it's going to cost them their jobs. And people like Jeff Bezos, for example, have been pretty open about that in the past several years. If he could replace every Amazon warehouse worker with a robot, he would in a second. I think that's pretty obvious if you're familiar with Jeff Bezos and his business model, and how they treat Amazon workers. Basically treat them like robots, assuming they don't need bathroom breaks or anything like, anything that regular people actually need, So that's going to be increasingly common. We're seeing a lot of companies already moving towards that. And of course, with all of the restrictions that are being placed on people in the post-COVID era, not in every industry, but in some industries that you either have to take regular COVID screenings or things like that, or there might have to be insurance for companies that are employing people in certain ways. Some companies may find it more profitable to move towards automation and robots than to have people who can get sick and injured and be liabilities and all of this stuff. So definitely a lot of the corporations that have become really powerful, even more powerful over the crisis of the COVID-19 crisis. I mean, I think we'll see them try and automate much more than they've already done. And obviously that's going to have major consequences for employment, what you do with all those unemployed people. And this is, these technologies have been known about for years, well before COVID. To think the elite haven't been thinking about how to handle this problem or how to solve it from their end to maintain the status quo, I think is honestly pretty naive, because these people do get together to think about how to protect the status quo and their wealth at the expense of everyone else. Hopefully that answers your question. I mean, there's a lot to say about AI, obviously, because they're trying to implement it really in every sector, from medicine to the military to supply chain stuff to farming even. There's huge strides being made right now to try and take people out of the equation as much as possible and replace it with machines without really having a society-wide discussion about what that really means and is that the future we really want. And I think that's a big problem, and I wish more people would pay attention to that particular side of this issue, because it's obviously happening right now, but isn't really being touched by a lot of people. You know, a lot of these billionaires in Silicon Valley specifically have a vested interest in this being the future. But it's not, you know, if you look at how far they want to take this technology, even in the context of transhumanism and stuff like that. I mean, it's really important that people are informed about where this leads, unless we, you know, stop this to some degree, or slow it down so we can actually talk about the impacts it's going to have.
Bezos said it out loud. Replace every worker with a robot in a second. That's not sci-fi. That's the actual roadmap. Post-COVID gave every CEO a new playbook. Workers get sick. Workers sue. Workers need bathroom breaks. Robots just need charging stations. The math has been done. And Whitman's most important line: society's infrastructure being handed to AI without any public debate. The debate hasn't been missed. It's been deliberately canceled.
So transhumanism, I guess, to most people, would be this effort to sort of merge humans with machines. Transhumanists view that merger as the pinnacle of human evolution, that humans have already evolved as far as they're going to evolve in nature, and that the next stage is to merge with machine intelligence, and go that route. But unfortunately, if you actually look into the history of the term, and I'm sure there's people that are enthusiasts about transhumanist technology that may not know this, the term itself was coined in a book in the late 50s by Julian Huxley, who at the time was one of the main people at the Eugenics Society, and he basically said that transhumanism, you know, is the new eugenics, and there are people in the Galton Institute, what the Eugenics Society is known as today, including David Galton, who's on their board, who wrote a book called Eugenics in the 21st Century, talking about how a lot of this, you know, transhumanist technology and gene editing and CRISPR and all of this stuff was going to usher in a new era, the golden age of eugenics and all of this stuff. You know, that's really disconcerting. But a lot of transhumanist enthusiasts do tend to have an overlapping interest in eugenics, at least when you get up into the elite circles of people who promote this. I mean, probably the best example I can give is Jeffrey Epstein, because it's been admitted in mainstream media that he was both a massive enthusiast in transhumanist technology, funding for, among other organizations, the World Transhumanist Association, now known as Humanity Plus, who's the people in charge of that are responsible for, like, Sophia the robot, among other things. And of course was also had a very you know, outspoken interest in eugenics. Jeffrey Epstein, as I reported recently in my my article about him and the true nature of his relationship with Bill Gates, which has not been covered by mainstream media, was very much involved with Microsoft as a company, and several of their executives who appear to have been compromised by Epstein, not just Bill Gates. And of course, a lot of things we see at Microsoft, including with Bill Gates, are ties to sort of eugenics related institutions, and also an interest in transhumanist brain-machine interfaces and all of this stuff. And of course, brain-machine interfaces you may have heard mostly from Elon Musk, for example, but a former Microsoft executive who runs, I think it's called Valve Entertainment, which is responsible for a lot of video games, has said that brain-machine interface is going to be the future of video games in the next couple of years, and all of this stuff. That's definitely very invasive, invasive technology, and would definitely, you know, be, I think it's pretty obvious, even though this obviously isn't included in the sales pitch, will be abused by national security agencies, whether it's of the country you're living in or an adversary of theirs abroad. Having that technology in people's brains and being able to manipulate people's brains with machines will obviously, or surveil their thoughts, among those things, will open up a very dystopian, Orwellian era that I don't think people really want. So obviously a lot of transhumanist technology is sold as being able to augment humans and their abilities, but it obviously comes with a cost. That's pretty significant. And some people that are closely associated with the World Economic Forum, like Yuval Noah Harari, have basically said that as soon as you know, governments are capable of, in businesses, really anyone with you know, this type of power is capable of surveilling people's thoughts, then we are just forever in the era of digital dictatorships. And you know, he's saying this to the crowd at you know, Davos, and in the beginning of 2020. So this is something the elite know, and I think it's pretty clear that they would favor a future where the people, the underlings, as it were sort of controlled in a way that where they didn't threaten the status quo, the current level of wealth distribution, and things like that, as opposed to having to deal with actual dissent, or deal with actual representative government. I don't think they're really interested in having to give up the pieces, the large piece of the pie they've cut for themselves.
The man who coined transhumanism was simultaneously a leader of the Eugenics Society. 60 years later, Epstein funding them openly, Bill Gates funding CRISPR, Elon Musk building brain machine interfaces. And Yuval Noah Harari at Davos 2020 told the room, "If anyone can read your thoughts, we are forever in digital dictatorships." He wasn't warning the public, he was briefing the room.